In the old Indian Territory, there was a lawman who put Pat Garrett and Wyatt Earp's records to shame. That same territory produced a young man who was even more bold and reckless than Billy the Kid. Two men living on opposite sides of the law. Frontier Marshal Bass Reeves and Black Cowboy Indian Outlaw Cherokee Bill. Today I'm sitting down with author and historian Art Burton. We're going to dive into the truth about these two Old West legends that for a long time America chose to forget. When you look at Bass's resume, it almost looks like something out of a comic book. Like it's incredibly impressive, second to none. But I wanted to ask you, in your research, as you got to know Bass, how would you describe the man behind the Silver Star and the man behind all those statistics and everything?
Well, I think the Bass was like a phenomenon in that he was very focused on his job once he became a deputy as marshal. And he would let nothing deter him. And he was known to be very focused on capturing people that he had warrants for. You'd rather have to leave the Indian Oklahoma territories for him not to find you. He was known to always bring in people he tried to catch. He was also known not to be a bully. He was, sometimes police officers are known to be bullies, and Howard Bass was always known to be a gentleman. He treated people with respect. The only problem you would have if you were an outlaw. If you're an outlaw, then you have a serious problem. And he had great detective skills, and he used deductive reasoning way before Sherlock Holmes. And he was very good with the pistol and rifle. The nomenclature is that he shot 14 men in the line of duty, but I found 2 or 3 newspapers after he died that stated he had killed over 20 men in the line of duty.
Wow.
But he didn't, pride himself on killing people. He prided himself on capturing and arresting folks. And in 1902, he had told a newspaper at that time that he had arrested over 3,000 men and women who broke federal law, which is a large number. But if you look at the numbers like in the 70s and 80s and 90s, he would bring back to Fort Smith and other repositories he worked out of. He'd bring back 15, 17 outlaws at a time. And so he was bringing people back in large numbers. And he became a legend. They were singing songs about him during his lifetime in the just remarkable. Like you said earlier, it's almost like a cartoon character, and I thought about that when I was doing the research. But he's totally, one of a kind, and I don't think you can relate any lawman, especially of that era, to what he did and how he did it.
I know he escaped slavery and he fled into Indian Territory. Can you tell us what that landscape was probably like that he fled to, and what exactly he would have had to have done to be able to survive and thrive the way he did?
Right. That part of his life is somewhat a gray area, but what I've been able to piece together is that he was a body servant. His master was a colonel in the 11th Texas Cavalry Regiment. And they went into the Indian Territory during the war, early phases of the Civil War, chasing Indians that were pro-Union. And so it was at that time, I think that Bass made his move, but Bass stated that he was with his master at the Battle of Pea Ridge. And so the altercation or his escape would have been after Pea Ridge, I believe. And family lore says that after he escaped from his master, that he hooked up with Chief Opathiaholo, who was the leader of the Union Indians in Kansas. And Opathiaholo supposedly told Bass to go back into the territory and fight with the Union Indians during the war. And that would make sense, though, because Bass learned the lay of the land, they say, like a cook knows their kitchen.
Yeah.
So he knew the Indian Territory backwards and forwards. And serving with Union Indians, he learned the languages, Cherokee and the Creek, Muscogee languages, and he learned, being able to live with Native Americans in the territory. And supposedly after the war, he served as a guide for surveyors of the railroad, the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad that was surveying land before he started serving as a guide for deputy marshals working out the Van Buren, Arkansas.
That's incredible. Now, how did Bass become a U.S. deputy marshal? Was it common for African American men to serve as deputy marshals at that time, or was Bass kind of an outlier in that regard?
No, actually, there was quite a few African Americans that come with the five civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, to the Indian Territory. And all those tribes had held Africans in bondage. And so after the Civil War, the United States made all the five tribes give their former slaves equal status in the tribes. And so there was a number of Africans who were Indian policemen, and there were also a number that were deputy U.S. marshals. And we have seen where there's a black deputy called Negro Smith who went after a stagecoach robbery as early as 1867. Wow. And because the stagecoach driver, I think, was murdered. But there's other instances of blacks before Bass. Bynum Carver, who was a veteran of the Civil War and a veteran of the 10th Cavalry Buffalo Soldiers, stated that he had started in 1873. So that would be 2 years before Bass started in 1875. So that's kind of like one of the misnomers that people have out there, that Bass is the first black deputy U.S. marshal west of the Mississippi, which is completely wrong. He became the most famous, but he wasn't the first.
Got it. That makes sense. That's one of the things I wanted to kind of touch on, kind of clear that up, because I heard that a lot, and I didn't think he was the first, but that's definitely good to know. Now, we talked about those contemporary newspapers. Like when I look through them, like you see Bass bringing in prisoners by the wagon load, like 17, 18 people, 13 people. It's like just tons. So what would it look like when he went out on the trail? How exactly is he managing to pull that off? What was his methods for that?
Okay. So to give you a picture of the Indian Territory, especially when he started in 75, they had what was known as the Dead Line, which was the MK&T railroad tracks. That was 60 miles west of Fort Smith. So you couldn't pick up a person with a warrant before you got to the Dead Line. They didn't want people taken because basically the deputies got paid for reimbursement for food and mileage. And so you had to wait until you crossed the Dead Line before you could start picking up prisoners. You can pick them up on the way back if they were, east of the Dead Line, but they didn't want you to pick up folks there. So he would travel as far west as Fort Reno, probably first Fort Sill, Fort Reno, and sometime Fort Supply. It would be a round trip of about 400 miles. Would take a month to 2 months to make the trip. You would take a grub wagon. Sometimes they take 2 wagons for supplies. And you'd have a cook, you'd have a guard, and you would hire at least one posseman to assist you with making the arrest. Some of the deputies hire 2 or 3 possemen. I very seldom see Bass with more than 1 posseman. I've seen him with 2, but no more than 2 at most. And so that would be a long trip. And the prisoners were shackled ankle to ankle. Very seldom would they ride in a wagon unless they were wounded. And so they would have to walk behind the wagons. This is something never seen in a Hollywood movie.
Right.
Period. And so that would be, so you'd have to go into the territory, you'd have warrants with people that you were looking for, and then you would ask the residents of the territories who had committed crimes. And you could get warrants, or, you hold the folks until you had a warrant, but you'd bring them in. So it was very arduous. A lot of times the deputies, when they made camp, they would be attacked at night by outlaws and their friends. That happened on a regular basis. It was probably the the most dangerous lawman job on the Western frontier in the Indian Territory.
Wow. Yeah, speaking of the danger, can you share some of the more like exciting arrests that he made? I know a lot of times there was, arrests related to alcohol and things of that nature, but there was some where he got in some gunfights and things like that, right?
Right. The most famous gunfight he had was with Jim Webb. And Jim Webb was a foreman of a huge ranch in the Chickasaw Nation near Texas. And there was a black preacher who had a little farm next to this huge ranch, and he was burning off some land, I guess, so he could grow his crops. And the fire got out of control and burnt off quite a bit of grazing land. And Jim Webb, being the foreman, went to talk to the preacher, and I guess they got into an argument, and Webb killed him. And so Bass got the warrant for Jim Webb's arrest. And the first episode, Bass went to the ranch disguised as a cowboy, because Bass's regular MO was always working in disguise. He did that all the time. So he disguised himself as a cowboy along with his possum that he had at that particular time. And they found Webb, tried to convince them they were just working cowboys and they was trying to get some work. And Webb was very suspicious. Bass was able to catch him off guard. And the another cowboy there pulled down on Bass, and Bass shot him and killed him. And they took Webb on into Fort Smith. And Webb was able to make bond. Some people with deep pockets, I guess, the rancher that he worked for and some other people bonded him out, but he didn't appear for his trial. And so Bass had to go back to arrest Webb, and he had a different possum in with him the second time, but they found him at a place called Bywater Station, which was a stagecoach stop in Chickasaw Nation. And Webb seen him coming and tried to make a break for it, but he couldn't get to his horse, and he started running across this wide expanse of land, and he had his Winchester rifle with him. And after a certain period, he stopped and he started pouring lead toward Bass. And I think he cut Bass's hat brim, knocked the button off of Bass's coat. And Bass's horse was so jittery at that time that Bass had to get off the horse. So, and in getting off the horse, he slid his rifle out. And when he hit the ground, he fired 2 shots at Webb, and he hit Webb twice. And they say both for the bullets landed about a hand's width apart. And this was at a distance about 500 yards, which is a quarter of a mile.
Yeah, that's a heck of a distance with the Winchester rifle right there.
Yeah, actually, the first story that inspired me to do the whole research thing on Bass came from Reverend Haskell Shubu. And Reverend Shubu told me that he drove the hack for Bud Ledbetter after the turn of the century, in the early 1900s. And that Bud Ledbetter had a posse after an outlaw at the Gibson Station, which was north of Muscogee. And he said that the posse was fairly large, and I guess they were trying to kill this guy they was after. And they was shooting at him, but they couldn't get nowhere. He said about the middle of the day, they had gone through quite a bit of ammunition, and Bud Ledbetter was very irate. And he told somebody in the posse to go back to Muscogee and get Bass Reeves. And he stated that toward the end of the day, the sun had started to go down, and Bass came on the scene. The posse had quit shooting at this outlaw that they were trying to capture or kill. And so it was very quiet. And they said this outlaw jumped up. And at the time when I heard the story, I'd watched so many Western movies, I'm saying, okay, he's going to jump up and get on his horse. And he said this outlaw jumped up and started running across this field. And the posse started shooting at him, and they were missing. And he said, Bud Ledbetter hollered at the top of his voice, "Get him, Bass." And he said, Bass Reeves said coolly and calmly, I will break his neck. And he said that Bass Reeves took his Winchester rifle and broke this man's neck at a quarter of a mile. And that when he told me the story, my initial the thoughts was, this is the biggest lie I ever heard in my life. And that was the first story I heard. And then later on, I found out how well this man could shoot. And he had those capabilities with a Winchester rifle, which is very hard. But calling a moving target at 500 yards is miraculous. That's almost unheard of.
Yeah, the break your neck story, that was actually a question I had on here from our friend James B. Mills. He wanted me to be sure to have you tell that story, so I'm glad you hit on that one.
Yeah, yeah.
One story that I think I remember reading in Black Gun Silver Star that I really enjoyed was the time that Bass disguised himself as a tramp,
Right,
and he went. There was these two outlaws that he was after, and he went to their mother. And
right.
can you kind of tell how that all went down?
Yeah, I guess it was a pretty big reward on these two brothers. I think somewhere in the area of $3,000, which was a lot of money back then. And so Bass thought about how he could capture them, and so he decided to go in as a tramp who had a criminal record. And so he dressed as a tramp, and wore real brogans and put a hole in his hat and hid his cuffs under his clothes and gun, and he walked to where their family lived. And when he got there, the boys were not at home, but their mother was. And Bass convinced the mother that he was on the run from the law, and that possibly uh, after she told him her sons were, on the other side of the law, that possibly they could form some type of union and commit some crimes together. And she let him stay at the house until the boys came home and she introduced them. And I guess they ate supper. And then that night, when they were asleep, Bass slept, took his handcuffs and put them on the boys. And that morning, he kicked them up and told them, "Okay, let's go. I'm Deputy Marshal Bass Reeves." And the mama was irate. They said for about a mile, she followed him and cursed him and called him everything under the sun. But he got back to his camp and told his posse that I guess my money won't turn. I guess my money gonna turn green now. He's proud of his capture. That was one of the ways deputy U.S. marshals would make extra money if they captured people with reward money, because they didn't get paid a salary until 1900. And so for then, you got paid on reimbursements for food and mileage and the money that you could make if somebody had a reward on their head.
Yeah, speaking of, like, how much Bass was earning, I remember reading he was one of the highest paid deputy marshals in the territory, just, bringing in $3,000 to $4,000 a year, but then it seemed like, things kinda went off the rails a little bit once, the William Leach shooting happened and, he was accidentally killed and everything. What do you what are your thoughts, based on your research of what kinda went down that night with William Leach and all that?
Well, that's kind of a mystery, but Bass and Leach had been arguing about Leach's cooking, and Leach was Bass's cook on that trip, and Bass was not happy with the product that Leach was putting out, and they were arguing about it. And there'd been a little dog, I guess, that was in the camp, and the cook was letting the dog lick the pans and pots, and Bass wasn't. He didn't like that at all. He told Leach he was going to kill the dog. Now, the popular story initially that came out was that the Bass and Leach had been arguing, and Leach had poured hot grease down this puppy's throat, and Bass got upset and shot Leach. And Leach fell into the fire, and Bass had to kick his body out of the fire. But that was the popular story that was out. When it went to trial, it came out that Leach had this dog, and Bass and Leach had been arguing, but Bass had got a bullet, supposedly a pistol round, in his rifle, and he was trying to get it out of his rifle. And in doing so, the rifle went off and hit Leech in the neck. And then they tried to get assistance for Leech, and he didn't die right away, but he died later on. So that it was accidental in that aspect. And when it went to trial, he was found to be not guilty. But it took about a year and a half for everything to come out, and Bass had to hire some of the best attorneys he could find in Fort Smith at that time, and he lost his property that he owned because he was in arrears. Now, the interesting thing also is that Bass was arrested, and he was in jail for at least 6 months. But we don't know if he was given some type of honorary status where he wasn't put with the common, folks that were in the jail. At that time, they had 2 huge holding pens under the courtroom. And I doubt very seriously if Bass was put in that area, but he was at the courthouse for 6 months before he was able to bond out. He's the only deputy marshal, because some of them, many of the deputies were very on the edge of being criminals themselves and did do criminal things, and would be found, they would go to prison. Bass is the only one I've seen, though, who was charged with a crime and was found to be innocent and went back to work as a deputy as marshal, which was very, interesting in that aspect. But the interesting thing about the Leech thing was that Leech was shot in the neck. And I know Bass had killed 2 or 3 people by shooting them in the neck. But so I don't know.
Wow.
My thought is that, okay, I'll go with the jury and fact say that, but I'm not just 100% sure that he and Leech hadn't been arguing, because Leech threatened to shoot Bass's horse if Bass shot the dog. And so I don't know. It was a bad argument that they had.
Yeah, I love your insight on that. That's really interesting, and it's just one of those things where it's like, well, unless you have a time machine, you'll never really know what went down that night. You just got to kind of take the jury's decision and all that, and the fact that Bass got rehired, like you said, as a deputy marshal, kind of,
Right. Also, another interesting aspect of that case is that the U.S. Marshal that put charges on Bass was the first former Confederate officer that he worked under. And the shooting of Leech occurred in 1984, and Bass wasn't brought up on charges until 1986. And the charges they put on him was not a manslaughter or accidental shooting or nothing like that. They brought first-degree murder charges on Bass, which is very interesting. So, that's just another aspect of that particular crime.
Right. And it seemed like after that, he may have, he became a deputy marshal again. Did he kind of migrate to Texas and start working out there after that, or?
Not right away. Not right away. He went back to work for the Fort Smith Federal Court in 1987, late 1987. And he had some arrests that were pretty big. In 1890, he arrested a Seminole who had killed 7 people named Greenleaf. And he went up against some other folks that had pretty big names. One was a Cherokee who was well known. My man is escaping me right now on his name, but so he did a few things. He arrested a lot of people in the early 90s for the Fort Smith Court, and he got some newspaper recognition for what he was doing. And so he didn't leave Fort Smith until 93. He did have an episode though where he arrested 2 white men who were property and had money, and he thought that they had killed a black man. and he didn't have enough evidence for the conviction. So he rode him around in his prison wagon for a month. And when he got back to Fort Smith, the newspapers castigated him for it. And that may have been part of the impetus for him to leave the Fort Smith area. And he left in 93. Now, he was real good friends with a white deputy named James Marshal. And he had started working with Marshal in the 1870s. Marshal also went to the Eastern District of Texas around 93 also, which is very interesting. And so they were very good friends. Marshal was an interesting character where he owned a saloon in Fort Smith. And I think he even owned a store at one time. And but he left Fort Smith also. And I think the reason why he left Fort Smith was due to some people saying he had some issues with some of his monetary things that he had filed with the federal government. But he left. He was never indicted for anything. And he spent the rest of his years as a deputy marshal in Texas.
Yeah,
when Marshal died, they brought him back and buried him in Fort Smith.
Oh, wow.
So he's in the large graveyard there in Fort Smith that has a large number of deputy marshals with a nice headstone.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know, the Cherokee fellow you mentioned, the outlaw, the name that keeps coming to mind, and I could be wrong, was it Ned Christie?
Yeah, Ned Christie.
Okay.
Ned
Yeah.
Christie.
And I remember reading something about like possibly there was some talk that Bass had like burned down his house or something like that, and there was a shootout. Is that right?
Yeah. He had a cabin, and I had to go back and do more research on that particular incident because some people were saying there's only one newspaper that said as such, and Bass didn't really go up against Ned Christie. So I had to find at least a half a dozen newspapers. And Bass did find Ned Christie. He burned his house down. They thought he had been killed in the house, but he wasn't. And the newspapers had stated that Ned Christie's wife had prevented him from shooting Bass Reeves. She did not want him to shoot a deputy marshal.
Mm.
And so they said that she saved Bass's life by having Ned. Ned was a pretty good shot with a rifle, expert marksman. So that's probably true that, Bass escaped from getting killed on that particular incident by Ned Christie's wife.
Well, and didn't the newspapers report that Bass had been killed by Ned Christie actually at one point?
Yeah, they did. After that particular incident, they I don't know why it went out that Ned had killed Bass, but that had turned out to be false. But that was replicated in the newspapers on numerous occasions until it was solidified that was a false story.
Yeah, crazy, crazy stuff. Well, one of the most talked about things from Bass's career is what happened with Benny and everything, and Benny, having to arrest Benny, the murder of Benny's wife and everything. But you hear multiple different stories about how it went down and the reasoning Bass arrested him, and a lot of people say Bass put the law over family and stuff like that. But I often wonder, like, was it maybe a little bit of Bass's like, he's going to get killed if it's not me that goes, like, so that's why he kind of went out and did it. Or is that even exactly how it went down? What's the real story there?
That was in 1902, and Benny and his wife weren't getting along very well, and she was not faithful. And I think he had a conversation with Bass about it. So Bass was aware of the situation, but Benny came home one day and caught his wife with another person. And then she had made some comments that, she favored this other person over him. And he had a revolver with him at that time. He just shot her in the head. He killed her. And after he killed her, the U.S. Marshal's office, Leo Bennett's office, put a warrant out for him. And Bass did not want any other deputies getting hurt arresting this son. That was the crux of it. And he was, I guess, fairly upset about the fact his son had committed a murder. And so he told Bennett, give me the warrant. I'll bring him in. I don't want nobody to get hurt. And so some people have told stories where Bass went out for a couple of weeks or something like that into the territory, but actually Benny was in Muscogee in a neighborhood, and Bass knew exactly where he was. And they supposedly a large number of folks followed Bass, and they didn't want to see Benny get killed. And so supposedly when Bass got to the house, people were telling Benny to give himself up. And supposedly Bass told Benny to come on out because I have to bring in, either standing up or laying down one way or the other. And I'm sure that if Benny had tried to put up a fight, it'd have been a sad scenario because Bass probably would have shot.
Yeah, and it seemed like Bass, still stood by his son even after it went down. I remember seeing he stayed by his side all the way up until Benny boarded the train to Leavenworth. So it's probably a really tough spot for Bass to be in, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. Before the whole thing with Benny, which was tragic for Bass, I did find a story that's not in my book. I was contacted by the Houston Police Department, and a former homicide detective who worked with the training for the department told me that he enjoyed my book, but it didn't have the Houston story. And I was kind of nonplussed. I said, the Houston story. So in 1896, there was a man in Houston had a boarding house, and he was murdered. And they thought that possibly one of the people that worked for him had done the murder, but they didn't have enough evidence. And so Bass worked for the Eastern District of Texas, which is in Paris, which is up near the Indian Territory. But the Eastern District of Paris goes all the way to the Gulf of Mexico at that point in time. And so the U.S. Marshal sent Bass and another white deputy to go down and take a look at where the murder occurred. They went into the boarding house and everything. And then Bass took on a persona of Jim Underwood. And he was put in jail with the guy who they thought was the perp. And he followed this guy around. They kicked him out of the jail in Houston. And Bass and this guy went to Dallas, to Gainesville, to Shreveport, Louisiana. Bass followed this guy for 3 months, and I think it was in Marshall, Texas, where this guy admitted to Bass that he had committed the crime. And this is the first time I'd seen Bass doing undercover detective work like this. But it took 3 months in the summer of 1896, and they did get the conviction. And so that was a very interesting story that I recently got in the last couple of years on Bass that just kind of blew me away in terms of his detective skills, working undercover, trying to get a conviction on a person who had committed a heinous crime like that. So that was in 96. See, a lot of the things, he was in Paris, Texas from 93 to 97. And a lot of the things that he did there were lost. They had a fire that wiped out the whole town of Paris, Texas, including the documents and newspapers. And so a lot of what happened while he was there, we'll never know. Sad to say. But in 97, he started working for the Northern District of the Indian Territory, which had the court in Muscogee. And he was there from 97 up until Oklahoma State in 1907, 10 years. So it's just kind of interesting about what happened. And his first wife, died in 96 in Fort Smith. And so in 1900, he remarried a lady named Winnie Sumter in Muscogee. So that was his second wife.
Yeah, what was life kind of like for Bass as he aged? I think I remember reading that he had taken a bullet to the leg, so he was a little more limited as he got older. But it seemed like he was still very revered and respected, even when he kind of worked to beat Muskogee and everything.
Right. As he got older, he walked with a cane, and although there's no newspaper talks about it, there was one newspaper from Langston, Oklahoma, that stated that he had caught a bullet, and that's why he was using the cane. Many newspapers at the time of his death stated he had never been wounded. The oral information that came down said that they had once Oklahoma Territory opened up, they had some notorious saloon towns in Oklahoma Territory. Whiskey was illegal in the Indian Territory. So these saloon towns were on the border of the Creek Nation and Seminole Nations. And Bass used to go into these notorious saloon towns, and this one town was called uh, was the Corner. It was a saloon town called the Corner, and it was the most notorious of them all. And supposedly a Texas cowboy confronted Bass at the Corner, and Bass caught a bullet in the leg, but he did kill this cowboy in the shootout they had, and that supposedly is how he got wounded one time. Now, there's no newspaper citations about this shooting at all, period. But that's what they said. Yeah, and as he got older, Shoeboot, who I had a chance to talk to, Reverend Haskell Shoeboot, told me that Bass walked the streets of Muscogee with a sidekick who carried a satchel full of pistols. And if somebody called his name, Bass would always put his back up against the wall before he turned around to see who was calling his name. So I probably, as it got toward the end of his law enforcement career in Muskogee, he was still had a big reputation because people knew his acclaim with weapons, and he was a big guy. He probably wasn't fighting too much in his later years, but his gunfighting skills stayed with him up until the time he died. Actually,
Yeah.
there was one incident in 1906, I believe, it was there where a man had burnt his girlfriend up, threw some gasoline on and put on fire. And that night, after it happened, he had a dream that Bass shot him, you know. And so the next day, he went directly to the marshal's office and turned himself in.
All over a dream. That's when you know you carry some weight, when people are turning themselves in over a dream.
A dream,
That's
right?
good. That's good stuff. Well, every YouTube video I've ever watched of Bass Reeves, in the comments, they always say, "Why hasn't a major motion picture been made about this man?" Now, I know there's been some lower budget films and things like that, and the Lawman series came out, Lawman series, and I know you're not a huge fan of that based on other interviews I watched. Do you think we'll ever get a major motion picture with Bass? And if we did, who would you want to cast to play that part of Bass Reeves?
Oh, I'm sure it's going to happen. Actually, the Western, The Harder They Fall, which I did not like. I thought it was more like a cartoon type of Western. But I thought that Delroy Lindo did a pretty good job as portraying Bass Reeves. Um, there was some other stuff like, they had a prison wagon there with bars on it, which they didn't have in Indian Territory. And you see that even Hang 'em High with Clint Eastwood, they had a prison wagon with bars. They didn't have no wagon like that in Indian Territory. That's Hollywood. But I think Delroy Lindo was pretty good. I was interested in seeing Denzel Washington play Bass. Uh, and when actually it looked like when they made the Magnificent Seven with Denzel, they tried to channel Bass a little bit. Uh, there, there's other actors out here that I think could probably do a good job. It's just a matter of finding somebody who wants to have a quality production, put some serious money on the production, have good acting with a good script. I think it's going to happen because, in my estimation, Bass Reeves was the greatest frontier hero in United States history. I can't think of anybody greater than Bass Reeves as a frontier hero. And so I think it's going to happen, and we probably get 2 or 3 movies somewhere down the line. Hope to be able to see a couple of them, hopefully. I like to see a good documentary even made on Bass would be good. There have been some documentaries. I even was in some. I had nothing to do with the production of them, but I'm not happy about any of them yet that I can say this is a first-rate documentary on Bass Reeves.
Now, kind of shifting gears a little bit, the other man you've written a book about, Cherokee Bill, who lived on the opposite side of the law of Bass. Oh, how would you describe Cherokee Bill? What can you tell us about him?
Cherokee Bill is probably the most colorful, the most bodacious outlaw in the history of the Wild West who's been totally overlooked. We've had 50 movies made about Billy the Kid, and he was in a range war. But here you have Cherokee Bill, who was a classic outlaw. He robbed banks, trains, and stagecoaches. And he loved to have shootouts with the law and was very good with a gun. And he was a teenager. He was captured and hung before he was 21 years of age. But his life, to me, is just hallmark for a movie. I don't know why there's not been a movie on Cherokee Bill yet. He was very interesting in life. I mean, his mother was a Cherokee freedman. Freedmen were the former people who were enslaved to the Native American tribes. And so their descendants became known as freedmen. And so his mother was a Cherokee freedman. His father, who had married a white woman, had told people he was part Mexican and part Sioux Indian and all like that. And that's not true. His father was a quadroon from Selma, Alabama, and had been in the Civil War, fought with some white units in the Civil War. Then after the Civil War, he joined the 10th Cavalry Buffalo Soldiers and became a sergeant. And there was an incident at San Angelo, Texas, in the saloon where a black sergeant was disgraced, and Cherokee Bill's father let the Buffalo Soldiers get their guns, and they went back to San Angelo and shot the saloon up pretty good. And 2 or 3 people got killed. And he had to go AWOL, which he did. And after he did that, he left Cherokee Bill's mother because she was a laundress at Fort Concho outside of San Angelo for the 10th Cav. And he ran away initially, I think, to Arkansas, and he took up with a young white girl, and they eventually married. And that's why he told people, he was very light-skinned. He could pass almost for white, but he told people he was part Mexican and part Sioux Indian, which was a lie. But he later told the truth when he was trying to get his Civil War pension, and he told them what he had did. And his name was Goldsby, George Goldsby. Cherokee Bill's real name was Crawford Goldsby. But Cherokee Bill had a lot of gunfights. Hell of an outlaw. I mean, he's first-rate outlaw. Probably, I put him up there with anybody in the Wild West in terms of just being an outlaw. He used to wear Jingle Bob spurs. Because, Jingle Bob spurs had a little bell on them that would tinkle. Then he generally wore a large white hat with a red band. And he was a very colorful guy. He had some chaps with studs on it. There's a gentleman had found his gun belt and his chaps, and sent me pictures of them. And so chaps with metal studs on them was not real common. So Cherokee Bill tried to be as colorful as possible, I guess, during that time. He was a teenager, and he was a hell of a guy. During the time that he was on his reign of terror, it was at the time that Bass was at the Eastern District of Texas. So Bass was not in the vicinity or the area where Cherokee Bill was operating at the time. Because Cherokee Bill basically operated 94, 95. It was only about 2 years. So he had like a short run like John Dillinger did. Not a long time, but he gained a lot of fame. And actually, I was able to, I wrote a small book on Cherokee Bill called Black Cowboy Indian Outlaw. And I was able to document the fact that the New York Times had a running commentary on Cherokee Bill up to the time he was executed. And so he had national recognition. But when they started writing dime novels and such in the early 20th century, Cherokee Bill was kind of totally forgotten about. I don't know if it was due to race. It could have been racism was at a zenith in the United States in the early 20th century. So a lot of things that African Americans had done on the Western frontier just kind of got lost in the show.
Right.
Right.
Now, how did Cherokee Bill fall into the outlaw lifestyle? Like I heard the legends that he shot his brother-in-law when he was 12 years old, but then I read that that's not true. It was actually later. How did it all go down and he end up going in that outlaw lifestyle?
Well, he was living at Fort Gibson, which is northeast of Muscogee, not very far away. Fort Gibson was one of the earliest towns in the Indian Territory, and it was a military post. And they had a little town there, very important, had a little black community there. And he went to a dance, and he had a younger brother. Him and his brother went to this dance, and an older black guy. They got into it with his brother, and Cherokee Bill tried to take up for his brother. And this guy, he beat Cherokee Bill down because he was much older. I guess Cherokee had to be about 16 at that time, 16, 17. And so the next day, I guess the guy had to go to the barn where they kept the horses. I guess he's making his horses in the barn. I don't know. And Cherokee Bill got hold of a gun and he shot him 3 times. And the gentleman that he shot was a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, as Cherokee Bill was. And so there was not a federal warrant put on Cherokee, but the Cherokee Nation put a warrant for attempted murder on Cherokee. And he went on the run and he hooked up with Bill Cook. And Bill Cook, he had worked with Bill Cook on ranches. Cherokee Bill had actually worked as a cowboy in the Cherokee Nation and the Creek Nation. And so they put a warrant out on him, and he started running with these outlaws that he had worked with earlier.
Interesting. And is it true that he made a man eat grass at gunpoint?
Cherokee Bill was sweet on this girl, and she had told Cherokee Bill that this gentleman or this miscreant had said that he was going to kill Cherokee Bill if he keeps coming around. And she told Cherokee Bill what he had said. And so Cherokee Bill had called him out in the vicinity. I think this was up in the Cooey area where many of the Black Creeks lived in that area. And Cherokee Bill said, I hear you going to, do some harm to me. And Cherokee Bill pulled out his pistol and told him, why don't you get down on the ground and get a belly full of grass? And the guy got down on his knees, ate grass until he, I guess, got a pretty good stomach feel. And then Cherokee Bill told him, if you ever come around or if I ever see you, I'm going to kill you on sight. And so don't let me see you again, ever.
Wow.
And so that was the story, yeah.
Yeah, wild
Cherokee
stuff. He
Bill.
seemed like a really cocky and confident kid, that's for sure. But
Yeah, and he loved to have shootouts with the police. I've never come across an outlaw. Most of them try to get away from the law, but Cherokee Bill loved to have shootouts with the law. And he felt that he could get the best of them whenever he was in a shootout with them. He had a few shootouts. He had one where a posse was after him, and they was in a pretty good gunfight, and he lost his hat.
Mm.
And so he had to go, he wanted his hat, so he had to go back and get his hat. So he took his Winchester and held it over his head, and he charged at the posse, and the posse turned and ran, and he got his hat. And so I guess, he felt that, the guy's a bunch of cowards or whatever, But yeah, he had some very funny escapades with the law.
that's good stuff. I heard he had some really famous last words too. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. When he was going to be executed at Fort Smith. And, they generally ask you have any last words to say. And Cherokee Bill stated he didn't come there to make a speech. He came there to die. And he was grinning the whole while he was on the platform. He didn't show no remorse or sadness or anything.
he was just built a little different. They they don't make him like that anymore.
No, no, not at all.
But you're right. It's amazing that more people don't know about him. I mean, I'm a fan of Billy and everything, but like you said, there's a little bit of Billy fatigue probably right now. There's a lot of stuff out there on him, and it's like there's these other captivating personalities and people from that era that like put something fresh out like that. He would make a great show or a great movie.
Yeah, I think the popularity of Cherokee Bill would have been greater. Billy the Kid did escape from jail, and most times when outlaws escape from jail, that would add to their notoriety.
It's true.
So Cherokee Bill did have somebody sneak a pistol into him while he was in the Fort Smith jail, and he tried a jailbreak and he killed one of the guards, but he wasn't successful. And so I think that kind of kept him from getting more notoriety, was that he was not successful with his attempted jailbreak.
Now, I've heard you're working on something regarding Muskogee, Oklahoma, for your next project. I've heard you say that Muskogee was actually one of the most dangerous and deadly towns of the Old West. What makes you kind of put it ahead of, say, Tombstone and Deadwood and Dodge City and all those other Wild West towns?
Yeah. I was fortunate enough. I did write an article on Muskogee for the True West magazine, and I stated the wildest town in the Wild West, and they changed the title to the wildest town in the Indian Territory. It was the wildest town in the Wild West due to the fact that it was wild for 40 plus years. Tombstone and Deadwood and Dodge City were only wild for 4 or 5 years at most, possibly. The other town that was probably wild was El Paso. But if you look at the number of gunfights, if you look at the fact that the U.S. Marshal Service lost the majority of the deputies in the Indian Oklahoma territories, over 120 got killed in the line of duty. The place where they got killed was a 50-mile radius of Muscogee. That was where the majority of deputy U.S. Marshals got killed. And so they had gunfights outside of Muscogee, in Muscogee, and around Muscogee, and it was a tough town. It was the end of the rails town, started in 75, 76 when the MK&T Railroad came through. And it was started, so it was wild in the mid 70s on up till Oklahoma statehood in 1907. And then they had gunfights after statehood, I know in the Muscogee region. They had one thing called the Plum Range War, which was near Muscogee, where people got killed. But there was a huge gunfight in 1906 in Muskogee, where some people were trying to, they were anarchists, black anarchists, and they had gunfights with the law. And I think about 6, 7 people got killed. It was a pretty big gunfight. Then the largest gunfight, although it wasn't real close, the largest gunfight in the history of the Wild West was in the Cherokee Nation at a place called a schoolhouse. It was a schoolhouse in the Cherokee Nation. And I think 11 people got killed in that gunfight. It was the largest gun. It has never been seen in a movie or a television show. But it should. It should. It's a major gunfight.
Yeah, and if someone would just make it, it would probably be talked about a lot more. Like, I don't think we would still be talking about the gunfight at the OK Corral if the movie Tombstone hadn't been made. You know what I mean? The stuff you're talking about sounds a lot more exciting and long lasting.
Well, they had a gunfight that was bigger than OK Corral in Oklahoma Territory with the Doolin Dalton gang. The Doolin gang at Ingalls. And I think there was at least three deputy marshals got killed in that gunfight, 3 or 4. So that was a big gunfight, but it wasn't nearly as big as the Going Snake, a schoolhouse gunfight. And that was in 74. And that's where I know 11 people got killed last year. Most of them are deputy marshals.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading more about that and everything when your next book comes out and all that. But Before we kind of wrap it up and everything, is there anything that you've worked on recently or that you got coming up that you want to plug and talk about?
Uh, well, for Tombstone Epitaph newspaper, I did write a recent article on James Marshal that came out in the December edition. And I also had another article previous in that newspaper on the Buffalo soldiers in the Indian Territory and them dealing with outlaws. Uh, Hopefully, they'll put an article out on the Buffalo soldiers and Billy the Kid, which I wrote an article on, which a lot of people aren't aware of the interaction between the Buffalo soldiers and Billy the Kid. I'm continuing to research Indians who are lawmen in the West, principally in the Indian Oklahoma territories, and I'm gonna continue to see what information I can find on African Americans. Now, one of the things that is interesting is that it was a black man named Frank Garrard who was part Lakota and part African, and he worked in the up in the Dakota territory and fought with Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull before he joined the U.S. Army. And he was there until the war was over, and then he became the deputy U.S. Marshal in Wyoming. And a lot of people aren't aware of Frank Garrard and what he did. And so that's one of the people that I hope to get an article out soon. It won't be a book, but I hope to do a nice article on him.
Yeah, that's good stuff. If our viewers are not subscribed to the Tombstone Epitaph, definitely get a subscription there. Check out those articles and everything else that Art's got coming up. Art, I really appreciate you coming on today, man. This was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed this conversation. And maybe we can do it again one of these days.
I like it, Nick. You take care. You're doing a good job, and my pleasure.
All right, if you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate the support, but please go ahead, hit that like button and subscribe because Art's coming back. There are plenty of other old outlaws and lawmen from the Indian Territory he and I want to discuss. Also, if you'd like to check out one of his books, I put links in the description. And if you have any questions you'd like me to ask Art, go ahead and drop those in the comments. Until next time, I'll see you later.